Hi everyone, Russell and Oscar here today. We're going to show you how to replace both clutch baskets on the Honda Talon. So we have a new clutch basket here. Here's the new one. Like I said, we're going to replace both of them, the 135 and the 246 clutch basket. And then we have an old one here so you can kind of see the difference of what the new and old looks like. So this is a pretty easy process. It can be a little intimidating, but we're going to walk you through step by step. If you have any questions, let me know. All right, step one will be to pull the 17 millimeter and 12 millimeter drain plugs for the engine and transmission to drain the oil. All right, so you'll need to take off your rear bumper if you have one. So that's already removed. Take off the rear bumper. Remove the shock, the bottom side of the shock. Once you get the shock removed, also disconnect the sway bar. And then for the R suspension, you have the upper trailing arm and the two radius rods that need to be disconnected. And then gently pull the axle out. Do not pull on the axle itself, because if you pull on the axle, it will separate inside of the CV, and then you'll have to take the boot apart to put it back together. So gently pry between the axle and the differential to get that rear axle out. All right, then we're going to take the rear differential out. There's going to be a 14 millimeter bolt and nut on the other side. We have a 14 millimeter there. And then you can't see too well, but there's two 14 millimeters right there that need to be taken out. I removed the vent line, which is right there. And then right here, oh, if I can get in there, unplug the speed sensor right there. So the speed sensor will stay there and the wire will slide up off the top. And then we'll be able to pull the rear diff out. All right, for the rear diff, we're going to, right here, we're going to separate the rear drive line from the rear diff, which is just basically a rubber band. And then pay attention to the direction of your axle. There will be a spring in there as well. So once you have the 4 bolts out of the rear diff, vent line, speed sensor disconnected, slide that forward, and then you can pull the rear diff right out the rear. All right, so you have to disconnect the wires. There's a couple, 3 hooked up right in this area. So we'll get those disconnected. And then we're going to loosen up these 10 millimeter bolts all the way around. So also like that one, and get the rear cover off. All right, so we'll slide in here with the 10 millimeter. And just loosen up all of the bolts around the rear housing. All right, so you're gonna remove this bolt right here, which that holds the emergency release screw in place. So we're gonna take that. We're gonna take this out. Can't really get to it right now. We're gonna take this out and then loosen up this bolt as well. All right, so when you take out the screw, there's going to be that retaining clip. So when you put it back in after everything is together, there's a little groove right there on that emergency screw that this needs to slide into when you tighten it down, so that screw can't work its way in or out. So once you manually loosen all of the bolts holding that housing, you can just get to them all with most of them with a couple extensions, and speed things up. So here's all of the bolts from the housing. This is starting at the 12 o'clock position going clockwise. So these are the different bolts and the order that they go in. You can see a bunch of them are different lengths. So this is like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, all the way around the order of the bolts for the housing. All right, once all 8 bolts are out, we're gonna just gently wiggle it back. There is a stud on the top and bottom that you have to wiggle it off of, so The stud is right there. And then we're just going to pull the housing out. Okay, so once you have the cover out, inspect this area right here. I've actually seen it where it's cracked, and it's probably from not putting the clutches in right, but a part of this just broke off of this section. So just when you pull it out, clean it up a little bit and inspect it. All right, so when you get it back together, this is about how, I mean, this is exactly how it should look if everything is slid in properly. Okay, so this is what will break the cover that I was having you inspect. So you can see the orientation, it goes just like that. All right, so now we're gonna pull out the clutch basket assembly. It's gonna slide right off of the end. Both the clutch baskets are gonna come out at the same time. So we're just slowly working it over the seal rings. Okay. And so if you look at the clutch baskets, there's a right way and a wrong way to put it on. So this is the orientation. Okay, so there's a larger gap here on the left side or in the front than the rear. So we're just gonna pull all this out and take it onto the bench now. All right, so here's the rear side of the clutch pack. So we're just going to remove that bearing. We're gonna pull this out as well. And then we're going to separate the clutch. All right, so we're going to separate these two just by kind of gently prying up in two different spots here. There we go. So basically we're prying it up. There's two O-rings right here that we need to be replaced, and then that's the clutch basket separated. So here's the specs to check and see if your baskets need to be replaced or not. So that 1.4 to 1.6 millimeters is the specs on it to see if they're still good. So once you have the clutch baskets off, thoroughly inspect this. So I've never seen or ever heard of this happening before, but this is completely bad, and so I have to order a whole new one, which is supposed to be one piece, and that's $785. So once that part gets in, we'll put the clutch baskets back on and put it together. All right, the reason I pulled the clutch baskets out and the issue I was having is half the time when I would put it in drive and just give it a little bit of gas, the engine would stall. And I assumed it was something with the clutch baskets, but it's actually this primary drive that is broken. All right, it's gonna be kind of hard to see, but there's two small seal rings right there that we're going to replace. And then there's four large ones. There's one there, and two more in the front. So we're gonna pull off those 6 seal rings and replace them. All right, so we're gonna pull out the front side, and this will slide into the clutch, but we're gonna take that out and put it into the clutches before we reassemble it. So that's what it'll look like, completely empty. All right, so here's one of the 2 seal rings, and here's one of the 4 seal rings. So you can see the part number. They're just a couple dollars each, but you can see like right there. So it's gonna slide over the shaft, and it's gonna be impossible to get the camera in there. So we're basically gonna pull the other 2 off and slide these 6 new ones, 2 small on the end, and then 4 new. All right, so spin the seal ring until you can see that opening, and then I'm just going to gently hook that seal ring and gently twist it off. And that's how you'll remove all 6 of them, the 2 small, 4 large. All right, so we're just gonna start with putting the graphite rings, give them a little oil bath here, and the motor oil that I'm gonna use. And then I'm going to assemble the small rings first. So I'm just going to start from the end and then do each ring. So the 2 small on the end, and then work my way forward and install all 6 of those. All right, so when assembling these, make sure that you spread them the least amount possible. And when they go on there, that the seal rings are right, like that would be wrong. So make sure that the seal rings are connecting properly like this on all 6 of them. Okay, once you get all 6 seal rings back in and lubed up with oil, I put a zip tie over each of the 6 seal rings and leave it overnight. And what that does is it compresses it back into place. Because when we go to slide the clutch packs back on, the clutch assembly, it shouldn't hang up at all. Because if you slide it over and it puts any type of nicks in those 6 seal rings, then if one of those seal rings are bad, it could quickly burn up one of your clutches if you don't catch it fast enough. So I recommend, like I said, zip tie 12 to 24 hours on it. Take the zip ties off, slide the clutch packs in. All right, we have our new clutch assembly right here, the brand new one. This is how it should look. I did fish these 4 tabs out of the oil pan with a magnet. They go right there. They were missing. And then we got our 4 new O-rings on there. And then you will see right here, there's tabs on this side. The side with tabs will face to the rear of the Talon when you go to slide it back into the engine. Okay, here's our old clutch packs, which you can see there was a lot of rubbing going on against them from the broken parts. So I'm just going to put 2 new clutches in. All right, so we have the new clutch started where the teeth are lined up and started right there. And then I'm just going to gently tap them into place with a rubber mallet. All right, so the tabs are here. We're gonna put the tabs down. And then we're going to put some assembly lube right here. And then we're gonna put the washer down. And then we're gonna put some assembly lube on top of that. And then we're gonna put the front guide into place. And we're using assembly lube to make it sticky so the front guide stays inside of the clutch, because if that slides apart when putting it back into the Talon, then you've got to take it out and reassemble it. All right, so we're getting our assembly lube there, the clutch pack. We're going to get that nice and clean, get the oil off of it, put some more assembly lube on top, and then put the front guide on. Okay, so there's the 4 clutch plates right there. Okay, so we have the washer on. We're going to line up the 4 clutch plates. Okay, and then it should set right there. So one way to tell, it's hard to get in there, the front guide should be sitting on the washer once you get all 4 clutch plates lined up and the front guide into place properly. All right, for the rear side, we have the assembly lube, the washer, and then the rear guide. So we're going to get those through the 4 clutch plates. And you'll see this one is different. It has a little lip there for the rear guide bearing to go on. So I have one more to put on, or one more clutch plate to line up, and then we'll slide it back into the Talon. All right, next up we're going to remove the 6 zip ties and then slide the clutch pack assembly back into place. All right, we got the zip ties off. I put some motor oil over the entire shaft and the seal rings to help things kind of slide into place. All right, I'm pinching the front and rear guides together with both hands. We're going to slide it down the input shaft very slowly very gently because we have to slide over those seal rings, and we don't want it to like jolt forward because that's when the front guide will come out of the front clutch. Okay, so we're going very nice and slow. It feels like the front guide is still in the clutch. So then we have to get everything else lined up. Of course, the input shaft is turning with the clutch assembly. There we go. I was able to hold the end of the input shaft. Okay, there we go. Got it in. There was no hang-ups. You can see, so we got the teeth lined up right there. And see if I can get a close-up. Okay, so you can see the front, or the rear and front small seal ring, and that distance right there. So you have to make sure that that is all the way on. So typically you can hear the front guide fall out of the front clutch, and that means you have to pull it out and slide it all the way back in. And if that is not all the way up like this, so you can see that distance, see the distance right there, then you have it wrong. So it's very, very, very important that you have the clutches all the way in. Otherwise, you're, the cover won't slide into place properly. All right, so we have the rear gasket on. So you have the dowel right there, which those dowels do pull out. So make sure they're pushed all the way in. And then the top dowel, make sure that's pushed in. And then make sure the gasket is properly aligned. And then slide the rear cover on. All right, so for the rear cover, we're just gonna put a bunch of motor oil in there because the two small rear seal rings have to slide in there. And then that rear bearing will slide right into this location. Okay, so when you go to slide the rear cover on, oh, and that slides into place too. When you go to slide this on, this should butt all the way up against the engine. If there's a gap or it's not going all the way on, that means that probably the front guide came out of the clutches and the whole clutch assembly is not all the way forward. So when you slide this on, it should snug right up against the engine, and then put the bolts in. All right, so we got the rear assembly slid in. So we're gonna line up the two dowels and get it into place here. So you get it twisted a little bit. Okay, just kind of. Okay, perfect. Got it that slid into place. Okay, without, let's see. So right here's kind of the gap. Okay, so just by me pushing it forward with my hand a little bit, that is snug. So that means the clutch pack assemblies are in place properly. Okay, if you can't push that snug with your hand, then you got to pull the clutch assembly back out, make sure the front and rear guide are inside of all four disc plates. All right, again, so here's the orientation on the bolts. That starts at 12 o'clock and that just wraps around clockwise. So that's the order of the bolts. So I'm gonna take those off, wipe them down, make sure they're clean, and then slide them into place and get them started. After you have the rear cover snugged up, then we have the four connectors that need to be put back into place. Oops. And I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. All right, so we got all of the wires except for the rear diff speed sensor into place, but you can kind of see how everything is ran, hopefully. The lighting is kind of bad. There you go. All right, next we're gonna remove this paper towel off of the rear driveline and slide the rear differential in. And before I slide the rear diff in, I'm just greased it up a little bit. All right, we're just gonna slide the rear diff into place and put the rear driveline in at the same time. So we're gonna kind of lift that into place. There you go. We can turn the need be. Okay, that slid into place pretty easy. It's just catching up on the rubber boot a little bit. There we go. Actually, twist that rubber boot around into place. There we go. And then, let's see. Okay, the rear breather line was kind of in the way, so I'll just slide that into place now. Yeah, put the bolts in, and that's it for the rear diff. All right, there's a little rubber O-ring right there, so make sure that that's slid onto the rear diff and that it's into place properly. There's a little O-ring right there on the front side as well. So make sure that's in place and then install the bolts. All right, make sure you get your vent line hooked back up. 2 14 mils on the top, 14 mil on the side, 14 mil right there. And plug in your speed sensor back up, or your iPhone 4-wheel drive light will come on. All right, next we're gonna put the axles back in. I'm not going to show step by step because this is pretty easy, but basically I'm going to take the covers off the end of both axles. I'm going to grease those up a little bit, slide them into the rear diff, which I kind of cleaned around there. And then we're going to put the upper chilling arm back in, hook the shock back up, hook up the 2 radius rods, hook up the sway bar, and give it a test drive. Of course, we're going to put about 6.5 quarts of oil into it before we fire it up. So don't forget to put some oil into the engine. Fill that up, 6 to 6.5 quarts. All right, we got the engine full of oil. We got the sway bar hooked back up. We got the upper trailing arm hooked up and tight. Radius rod, lower radius rod hooked up. Rear diff all in. Now we're just, the shock hooked back up and tightened up. And now we're just gonna put the rear tires on. So, all right, I have a separate video for the clutch relearn process. So I'll put the link to that video down in the description. So just click on that to finish up that process. Okay, so doing the clutches on this is not always easy. So I'm gonna show you some troubleshooting because I spent days and days and days trying to get this relearn to go through, and it would not. And I probably attempted 40 or 50 clutch relearns and it didn't go through. So some of the things that I did was I pulled the clutch packs back out, replaced the O-ring. So the first time I went to do a clutch relearn, the low oil pressure light came on. So I instantly knew that one of the 2 rear seal rings were not working properly. So I pulled the rear cover off, replaced the 2 seal rings, and then attempted a clutch relearn. And then the low pressure light wasn't coming on anymore, so I knew that I had resolved that issue. I probably attempted 20, 30 more clutch relearns. After that, it still wouldn't work. So I pulled the clutch packs out, replaced all 6 seal rings again. That wouldn't work as well. So I replaced the shift valve. So I'm going to show you, there's basically 2 shift valves and 1 orifice valve, which all 3 of them are the same. I replaced those. I also replaced the pressure sensors, which those are about $100 each. And those are the 3 little sensors on the back of the cover where they're all side by side right on the bottom of the rear cover. Replaced those. Still wouldn't do a clutch relearn. So my final time, I replaced the 2 small seal rings, put it all back together. Still wouldn't do a clutch relearn. I took it out and drove it for about a half an hour, and about every 5 to 10 minutes or so, I would just pull over, stop and do a clutch relearn on a road. It failed about 4 times. The final time I just put it in low, ran it through all 6 gears in 4-wheel drive. I don't know if this makes a difference. I'm just telling you what I did. Left it in 4-wheel drive, stopped on the side of the road, attempted to do a clutch relearn, and finally it worked. So after 50, 60, 70 clutch relearn attempts over about a week period, I finally got it to work. So I would recommend, before doing this, get the secondary filter, and I'll show you here in the video. There's a secondary filter in the housing, the 3 shift valves, and just go through and check everything, and just be prepared that it might turn into a huge nightmare trying to get the relearn going. So like I said, for me, taking it out and driving it, and then doing the relearn on the side of the road is what finally worked for me. So I recommend stocking up on those seal rings. So I ended up going through 16, which probably isn't necessary. I just kept replacing them because they're cheap, trying to get it to work. 16 large seal rings, and I went through 6 small seal rings. Super cheap, and it eventually got to work. So just take that into consideration. So in the following videos here, I'll just kind of show you step by step on how to find that secondary filter that's kind of hidden in there, and how to replace the shift valves as well. So hopefully this will help you out. So at a very minimum, if you're having problems doing the relearn, you want to pull out those shift valves, and there's a little filter on the tip of them. Make sure that those are completely clean, and then take out that secondary filter and make sure that that's clean as well. All right, if you get everything back together and do the clutch relearn, and right after you start the clutch relearn, the oil pressure light comes on. That typically means one of the 6 seal rings are bad, and you'll have to take everything apart and redo it. So this fast flash means that the clutch relearn failed, and the MT and AT is still lit up. All right, so to get to the shift valves, we're going to take out these 7 bolts here around here, and keep in mind there's going to be probably a half a quart of oil or so. So I have it upside down in the oil pan. All right, after you undo these 3 connectors, this connector, and remove the 7 bolts, okay, this wire right here is through and is siliconed in, so you have to gently get that silicone out of there. All right, once you get the cover off, there's going to be 3 shift valves, and we are going to swap those out. A little button here on the side you push to release the wire. So the gray wire goes up top, red there, black there. So we're going to swap out those 3, but I'm also going to take out all of these bolts, separate this, and there's a filter, a screen in there that I'm going to check. Once you get the 3 valves out, right here is kind of like a mesh filter. That's where you want to make sure that they're clean, especially if the clutch relearn is failing. Once you remove the top section, you have to get this plate out of the way, and then right there's the secondary filter. So pull that out and replace it. All right, so here's the new shift valve. You just gently pull that out, slide it back in, and then tighten up the 3 bolts for the 3 shift valves. And I'm gonna clean this up and then put some silicone on all sides and then put it back together. Thank you for watching, and hopefully this video helps you out a little bit if you decide to do a clutch basket replacement. If you have any questions, let me know. The YouTube notifications are a little slow, or I don't always get them, but I will definitely try to get back to you.